This saw more than 20 transmission towers knocked over, saw a lightning strike in a power station, and then these two events plus others led to an electricity surge through the interconnectors which supply electricity from Victoria into South Australia. There are two, the Hayward interconnector and the Murray Link interconnector, and both automatically shut down in order to protect both people and property. The obvious task ahead of us now is to restore power to those who don't have it in South Australia. But it's also to learn the serious lessons that arise from this wake-up call and this really significant event that we've seen in South Australia. So the Prime Minister has asked me to gather the energy ministers from the states and the territories together under the COAG Energy Council, of which I chair, which we will hopefully do in coming days. And we will be briefed by the Australian Energy Market Operator and other relevant parties about what has occurred there and what are the lessons to be learnt, not just for South Australia, but also for across the national electricity market. Let me be absolutely clear. Energy security is this government's number one priority. We must keep the lights on. And while we are transitioning to a lower emissions future, we will not compromise on energy security. So we will take all practical measures to ensure that energy security is preserved and protected across the country. And we will be asking some very hard questions of the energy market operator as to why this event occurred and how we can ensure it not happening again. Are there any questions?
You've been equivocal this morning about whether this was entirely storm-related or whether this is partly due to the renewable energy network. Can you be 100% sure now and say that it was one or the other or a mix of the two?
Well, there are two separate questions here. The first is what actually occurred in South Australia, and the advice to me, as I've been pretty unequivocal on this morning from the Australian Energy Market Operator, was that the weather event led to those transmission towers being bowled over, led to the lightning strike in the power station, and led to the interconnector being shut down. So there was a cascading effect across the network. That was a weather event. Now, South Australia gets more renewable energy than any other state except Tasmania, which has more than 90% of its power coming from hydro, but hydro is a baseload power. South Australia gets 41% of its power from predominantly wind, but also from solar. That type of renewable energy is intermittent, meaning when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, power is not being generated. This creates issues for the stability of the system because of the level of frequency that is generated. And these are issues that COAG are currently looking at.
Well, if it was a weather event, why are you bringing up renewable energy today?
Because right now in this country, we have a hodgepodge of renewable energy targets that are spread differently across the state and territory and federal governments. And that is not ideal from an economic position because it means that it is incentivising investment in particular states which may not be the most efficient allocation of resources to get the best possible renewable energy investment and, of course, environmental outcome. But it may also raise real issues for the stability of the system because of what is called these frequency control and ancillary services. And so right now in Victoria, they only get 12% of their electricity from renewables, but their target is 40% by 2025. You have Queensland, which currently only gets 4% or 4.5% of its power generation from renewables, but it has a 50% target by 2030. And then you have South Australia, which currently gets 41%, which has a 50% target by 2025. We at the Commonwealth level have a target of 23.5% by 2020, and we're currently at 15%. Now, that's still going to be hard to get there, but if you've got these completely unrealistic state targets, then it does raise issues for the stability of the system and for the most efficient allocation of resources. So this will be a priority for us at the upcoming COAG Energy Council as to whether we can harmonise across the state and the Commonwealth a single renewable energy target going forward.
Yesterday, last night on 7:30, you said this is a weather event, but then you started talking about the stability of renewables.
Sure.
It looks like you just want to kick renewables.
Well,
and you've now got Barnaby Joy saying it's all about renewables. Is that disingenuous to link the two when they're clearly not?
well, we're talking about energy security and climate change. And we're talking about energy policy. Energy policy and climate change are two sides of the one coin. That's why they've come under the single minister. So you cannot talk about reliability of supply, affordability of supply, without taking into account its impact on emissions reductions and our targets. Likewise, you cannot talk about emissions reductions and without understanding that of the measures you take in that regard of its impact on both price and stability. So while the event in South Australia, according to the Australian Energy Market Operator, occurred because of those extreme weather events, I've been very clear about that, there is broader questions about the future of energy security in this country, which is our number one priority when it comes to the speedy uptake of renewables and whether the system is built sufficiently to take into account the impact of that change. We are doing it progressively at the federal level, and as I've indicated, the states have rushed ahead into this with very high and in many cases unrealistic targets which do have knock-on impacts.
Can we ask a question?
Australian energy, as you mentioned there, the Australian Energy Market Operator has said that that any system wouldn't have been able to cope with this sort of weather event. So,
Well, these are the very questions. Well, these are the very questions that we will be asking of the Australian Energy Market Operator. As you can understand, I've been in hourly contact with the chairman of AEMO both last night and today. And the question is, what other systems do we need to put in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again? Because even though it was an extreme weather event, there may be other changes that we can make to strengthen the resilience of the system. Now, they're questions that will be asked and answers that will be given over coming days, weeks, and dare I say it, months. They're not answers that we have right here today, but these are questions that need to be asked, because if you're one of the 1.7 million people in South Australia, you can't afford to see this happen again. Well, I think the issue here is not what about climate change leading to the events of yesterday. I think the real issue here is the system strong enough, resilient enough, built for purpose to actually deal with these particular events? That is the question before us. Now, when it comes to climate change, the government is very serious about its emissions reductions targets. As the Prime Minister has said, the 26 to 28% target is one of the highest in the G20. On a per capita basis, it's more than 50%. So we have got a significant target. We're making inroads. We're on target to beat our 2020 target by 78 million tonnes. We beat our first Kyoto target. And now we have the emissions reduction fund in place, the National Electricity and Energy Productivity Plan, the renewable energy target, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, a whole series of measures in place to reduce our carbon footprint. So we've got our target and we want to get there. But right now, my focus and my commitment to the Australian people is energy security is our number one priority. We must keep the lights on. Well, obviously, this is an area where sides are coming to it with different perspectives to start. And I would say to my fellow ministers, we must find the common ground here. because the system at present is not adequate. And that is why we need to work at harmonisation across the country about the renewable energy target.
Is that something you can do unilaterally?
No, I can't. And this is why the COAG Energy Council is such an important body, because no jurisdiction, be it federal or state, is supreme in relation to energy policy. It's a combination of responsibilities and powers, and therefore we have groups like the Australian Energy Market Commission, the Australian Energy Regulator, the Australian Energy Market Operator as key institutions that help the national electricity market run effectively.
Do you have a higher preference when it comes to renewable energies? I know the government's had a troubled history with wind turbines. Do you think they're ugly? Do you think they're unworkable?
Well, I've said in the past that we're agnostic as to the source of the renewable, but there is an important point here around hydro, which is hydro is baseload power, because it can be turned on, regardless of the time of the day and regardless of the weather conditions, because there's water in the dam. That does not apply to both wind and solar. And so this is an important issue, and that's why we agreed at the COAG meeting on the most significant set of gas reform policies in 2 decades in Australia, because gas has half the emissions of coal, and it is an important transition fuel. So as renewables become a greater part of the energy mix, gas plays an increasingly important role in setting electricity prices, and because it can be a baseload power, it can be very important for Australia's energy future.
Is there any concern that you won't get to the bottom of that interconnected system failure because the government suddenly moved on to talking about focusing on renewables?
Well, the interconnector shut itself down, and in terms of what went wrong here, this will be the substance of a significant AEMO report and review, and that will be made public. So you will see what I see in terms of the issues in relation to what happened here. But the interconnector there are 2 interconnectors going from Victoria to South Australia, and one is called, as I said, Murray-Link, and the other one is Haywood. Back in July, you may remember, there was real volatility in the wholesale electricity market price, and that was due to a combination of factors which included the scheduled upgrade to the Haywood interconnector. Now, what happened here was very different to that. There was no upgrade that was taking place. It was because there was a frequency or electricity surge that it took place because those transmission towers had come down, and that went into the interconnector, and the interconnector automatically set itself off. But the interconnectors came on at the early stages of this morning. Last question.
This might be answered this morning, but why was the whole state shut down? I mean, if there is a safety mechanism, why can't, is it regionally operating and shut out sections of it, or does the whole thing just have to go?
Well, according to the AEMO, there was a cascading effect. So when one part went down, this led to demands on other parts, and it just flowed on to the situation where you had the whole state go into black. Now, one of the questions we'll be asking AEMO is can other measures be taken to ensure that the cascading effect does not occur, and so that the lights can be kept on, even if there is a very disruptive event. Thank you very much. Last question.
As a sort of leading Victorian minister, would be arguing that Victoria gets $1.45 billion for asset recycling?
Well, as you know, the Victorian Labor government haven't been very good at using federal money because of what we saw, the debacle over the East-West link, and fancy paying more than $1 billion not to build an important road here in Victoria. Look, these are matters for the Treasurer. He's had a bit to say about this, but obviously we always want the best possible deal for Victoria. The federal government stands ready to make a very significant financial infrastructure commitment here in Victoria, as it has done in many other areas of infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that was from Melbourne. That wasn't live, but just in the last half hour or so, the Federal Energy Minister, Josh Frydenberg, keen to see a broad discussion about the impact of renewable energy on the resilience of the electricity supply system. So the federal government is raising this in the discussion of the South Australian storm, which started to hit South Australia yesterday and is continuing to hit the state now. There was a statewide blackout for several hours. The South Australian electricity boss spoke to us a little earlier. He says the blackout and the ability to reconnect people, the speed at which they can do that, has had nothing whatsoever to do with the amount of wind generation in South Australia.